It's morning in Ojeje village, Pelek Parish in Amuru district, and these children are pounding maize grain for the day's only meal. At least 27 people, mostly children below the age of 10, live here. 61-year-old John Nyeko watches helplessly. He says that they have resorted to this kind of life because of crop failures last season.
We planted cassava, but was eaten by vermin. The rest was first failed in the ground. We then planted millet too. It was eaten by the bush rats.
But the stock of maize is not enough. Millet is being harvested, still green months before its time. For millet to be harvested, it has to look like this in the garden. Food scarcity cuts across the whole region of northern Uganda. These people, having lived in camps for more than 20 years, are now struggling to have a meal on the table. But what is important to note is that the little they had harvested last season was sold off for them to rip off from the market prices that had gone so high. Adibango Julius works with Sendekau Uganda, a charitable organization that works to improve the lives of the rural poor. He says the early harvest speaks volume of the magnitude of the hunger problem.
Normally, millet is dried and processed after drying. But when you see people trying to process green millet like that, that means there's a problem.
So later this year, less volumes of crops will be harvested, and the people will have to come up with other indigenous ways to stay alive. The parish chief of Paleke Parish in Amuru, Jabosco Akot, says when the people return to their villages after years of living in internally displaced people's camps, they planted traditional food crops of cassava, sweet potatoes and millet, but there was low production.
Cassava these days, the type which we used to grow here, it does not now do well. That is the type called Okonyanadak. Wherefore, when we plant Okonyanadak, it does not do well as it used to be.
Another organization, Self-Help Africa, has now teamed up with Sendekau Uganda to help improve food security and nutrition at the household level. The head of programs at Self-Help Africa, Apple Tumwejuche, says they will for the meantime rely on local knowledge while picking crops to plant in a 3-year pilot project for 300 households.
In many areas in Uganda here, we still depend on rain and even the advice given by elder people. Because once they say this area you can grow this, then you try. But our advice mainly depends on how the area is. If they tell us here in a dry season you may not succeed, then we also say let's wait for the rains. But our advice normally is to do it at the appropriate time.
Emphasis will also be on revamping food granaries, which were common for food stores in most communities across the country, but with fewer harvests, many saw no use for them.
This is an area that is, the villages are coming up. They initially were not here because of the war, but these are startups. And in, say, 2 years or more, there will be quite very many in every home. That's what we try to encourage them to do.
We
used to have granaries in the past, but these days we have crop failure. Crops are just dying in the field. If harvests were good, I would have constructed one, but at the moment it's useless.
The Social Development and Advocacy Officer of Sendekau Uganda, Elizabeth Okware, says skills in the use of new agricultural technologies will also be given to farmers to help them adapt to climate change. A report by the International Food Policy Research Institute, IFRI, on agriculture systems predicted in 2009 that East Africa will face both crop gains and losses as a result of climate change, but said food security is an achievable goal if new farming technologies are embraced. Elsewhere in the country, increasing prices for food and other essential commodities continue to erode food security. Namutumba district has had to deal with hunger cases of malnutrition among children, partly because of hailstorms that destroyed harvests.
The hailstorm struck Friday evening and lasted 4 hours, destroying mango fruits on which they have been depending for food.
About 500 households which are being affected by now.
Even in urban areas like Kampala, millers in Kisenyi market are worried. Maize that should be coming in droves for mailing is not. In the region, a drought across Ethiopia, Somalia and Kenya has put more than 12 million people in a food crisis. Those most affected are also the poorest. Venex Watebawa, WBS News, Northern Uganda.